The crackling sound came first. Sharp, unnatural, like bones snapping underfoot. Ethan Cole stirred from sleep, groggy, disoriented. At first, he thought it was a dream. Maybe fireworks? A neighborhood barbecue? But then came the stench. Thick, bitter smoke pouring through the bedroom window, clawing down his throat and burning his lungs. He shot upright. Ethan yanked the curtain aside and froze. His police-issued motorcycle was on fire. In his driveway, flames danced wildly across the metal frame, twisting it like a possessed sculpture. Orange and blue tongues licked the tires, devouring rubber, plastic, and chrome. The heat distorted the air in shimmering waves, casting shadows that flickered like specters across the walls of his house. He stumbled out of bed, bare feet slapping the hardwood, the fire extinguisher, the front door. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as he bolted outside, the cool concrete offering little relief from the radiating heat. But it was too late. The fire had won. The motorcycle, his partner on countless midnight patrols, chases, rescues, was reduced to a shrieking skeleton of molten metal. The red and blue decal of the state trooper unit melted and bubbled as if mocking its former purpose. And then the laughter came. He turned sharply. Across the street, beneath the glow of perfectly arranged garden lights, a group of neighbors stood in the shadows of a pristinely manicured lawn. Wine glasses in hand, dressed like they had just come from some country club gala, they smiled and whispered among themselves as if they were attending a celebration. One of them stepped forward. Vivian Hart, president of the local HOA. Immaculate as always, pearls around her neck, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Next time," she called out, raising her glass, "maybe you'll follow the rules, Mr. Cole." Ethan's blood froze, not out of fear, but from the sheer audacity of what he'd just witnessed. He wasn't new to conflict. He'd seen car crashes, shootouts, domestic standoffs. But this was something different. This was personal. This was war. 2 weeks earlier, he'd moved into this seemingly quiet suburban neighborhood after transferring from the city. He'd wanted peace, a chance to breathe after years of street work, a place to park his bike, mow his lawn, maybe drink a beer on the porch like a normal person. Instead, he got a knock on the door from the HOA, a committee dressed in cardigans and fake smiles. They handed him a welcome packet, but the undertone was clear. Join us or be excluded. Ethan, polite but firm, declined. That didn't go over well. The next day, a fine appeared in his mailbox. His grass was apparently half an inch too long. A day later, another fine. His police motorcycle, parked in his own driveway, was considered non-compliant. They wanted it out of sight. A $500 penalty. He laughed. He tossed it. He didn't think much of it. Until tonight. Until his property was set ablaze. Until the very people who were supposed to care about community standards stood across the street and toasted to arson. The fire department arrived in minutes, bathing the street in red light and wailing sirens. Neighbors emerged from their homes, confused and worried. Ethan stood still, arms crossed, face unreadable, as the firefighters doused what was left of his bike. The stench of burnt rubber and scorched oil hung heavy in the air. One of the firefighters, a guy he knew from town, walked over, his eyes wide. "Jesus, Ethan. What the hell happened?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have to. His jaw was clenched so tight his teeth hurt. Rage simmered beneath his calm exterior, controlled, but white-hot. They'd made a mistake, a very serious mistake. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was who Ethan Cole really was. Yes, they knew he was a cop, but they didn't know he was a state trooper. They didn't know he had jurisdiction beyond city limits. That he wasn't just a patrol guy issuing parking tickets. That he'd trained with federal agencies. That he had authority they couldn't even begin to understand. And they sure as hell didn't know he had high-definition security cameras mounted discreetly around his house, recording everything. That night, Ethan sat in his darkened living room, the glow of the screen reflecting off his eyes as he reviewed the footage. Every damn second. There they were, Vivian Hart and her little HOA gang, creeping onto his property at 2:14 a.m. Oscar Bell, the pudgy guy in the beige sweater vest, poured gasoline like it was a backyard chore. A red-haired woman, Vivian's right hand, no doubt, struck the match. The ignition was instant. The fire blazed to life, and the group scurried back across the street, giggling like teenagers playing a prank. Only this wasn't a prank. It was felony-level arson, on state-owned law enforcement equipment. Ethan paused the video and leaned back, a slow smile curling at the corners of his mouth. Not out of joy, but satisfaction. They had no idea what was coming. The next morning, as dawn broke across the neighborhood, Ethan stood outside, sipping his coffee, watching. The HOA board gathered near the community garden like they always did, gossiping, posturing. Vivian caught his eye and offered a smug look. "Such a shame about your motorcycle," she said sweetly. "Perhaps next time, you'll reconsider our guidelines." Ethan smiled back. A slow, deliberate grin that didn't match the warmth of his coffee. "Oh, I definitely will," he replied, voice light. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his badge, flipping it open just enough to catch the rising sunlight. Vivian's smile disappeared. Her skin went pale. The other board members turned silent, suddenly uncomfortable in their perfectly ironed khakis and floral blouses. "Yeah," Ethan said, eyes locked on hers. "I think we should talk. Maybe at the station. I'd love to hear what you all have to say." Under oath. He turned on his heel and walked back toward his house, leaving them stunned, sweating in silence. They'd started the fire, but they had no idea he was about to bring the whole damn house down. Ethan Cole didn't sleep that night. Not because of the smoke that still lingered in the air or the twisted, blackened skeleton of his motorcycle that sat smoldering in the driveway. Not even because of the smug looks from the HOA board that still echoed in his head like a mocking chorus. He was wide awake because fury had burned through the last of his exhaustion, leaving only a cold, calculating fire behind his eyes. The smell of gasoline still clung to his clothes as he sat at his kitchen table, the glow of his laptop illuminating the darkness around him. His jaw worked in silence, molars grinding, as the security footage played on repeat. Slow, grainy, undeniable. There they were. Vivian Hart, Oscar Bell, the red-haired woman, Melissa Crane, HOA vice president. Time stamped. Face visible. Actions unmistakable. At exactly 2:14 a.m. They had crept onto his property like petty thieves, not even bothering to wear masks. Oscar had carried a red gas can like it was a birthday gift. He walked straight up to the motorcycle and doused it in fluid, checking over his shoulder once to make sure no lights were on. Melissa followed behind, crouched low, glancing nervously around before striking a match and tossing it like it meant nothing. The screen flared white as fire erupted, and then came the laughter. Vivian stood back across the street, wine glass in hand, nodding approvingly as if judging a fireworks display. Ethan's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of disbelief. These weren't criminals in ski masks. These were homeowners, parents, respectable community leaders, and they had just committed a felony against a state officer on government property, and they had no idea who they'd really messed with. Still, there was a problem. The footage was clear enough to show faces, but the audio was faint, and one camera angle had a brief obstruction from the windblown leaves of a maple tree. It didn't matter legally, not with the video already that damning, but Ethan wanted more. He needed airtight evidence, bulletproof. So, just after sunrise, Ethan walked the block. He wasn't in uniform, just jeans, boots, and a worn leather jacket. He went door to door under the guise of checking in with neighbors. "Hey, you see anything weird last night?" Most were kind, curious, some shocked when he mentioned the fire. But when he arrived at the house next to the Harts, an older man named Mr. Wilkins surprised him. "Yeah," the man said, leaning on his cane. "Heard some rustling around 2 a.m. My wife thought it was raccoons. I checked our security feed just in case." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Would you mind if I took a look, Mr. Wilkins nodded and shuffled off. A few minutes later, Ethan was watching fresh footage, different angle, clearer resolution, and this time, with audio. It was all there. Oscar's voice, unmistakable, saying, "Let's make sure this guy learns his place." Vivian's reply came crisp and cold. He wants to ignore our rules? Fine, we'll show him what happens. Melissa's nervous whisper. This feels extreme. Vivian cut her off. Do it. The match lit with a tiny hiss. Ethan's jaw locked. His eyes never blinked. He copied the video to a flash drive and thanked Mr. Wilkins with a tight nod. Back home, Ethan dropped the flash drive on his desk and called Tommy Briggs. Tommy answered after 2 rings. Yo, early call. Everything okay? Ethan's voice was calm, too calm. You sitting down? Oh boy, what now? I've got evidence, video, audio. HOA board committed first-degree arson, state property, my cruiser. There was a pause. Then a burst of laughter. You're serious? I wish I wasn't. Tommy's tone shifted. You want me to pull the paperwork? Yeah. I'm bringing you the footage in an hour. Jesus, Ethan. HOA did this? You should see the way they smiled while it burned. But the HOA wasn't done playing games. That evening, as Ethan returned from the station, a strange silence hung in the air. Not the calm kind, but the kind you feel right before a thunderstorm. As he approached his driveway, something felt off. He crouched to check under his truck. His stomach dropped. His brake line had been cut. Not frayed, clean, precise, professional. He stared at it for a long moment, then stood slowly, scanning the neighborhood. Window blinds twitched shut, porch lights flicked off. The message was clear. Back off. But instead of fear, something else bloomed inside him. Resolve. They thought they could scare him. They thought they could hide behind their white fences and fake smiles. They had no idea what he'd faced before, what he was capable of. This wasn't just about his motorcycle anymore. It was about the principle. Later that night, another warning came. Ethan was halfway through logging his reports when a sharp crash echoed through the living room. Glass shattered. He dove for cover, heart pounding, instinct kicking in. When he looked up, a rock lay on the floor, wrapped in black cloth. Inside, a message scrawled in jagged handwriting. Even cops disappear sometimes. He stared at it. No signature. No bluff. This was real. They were escalating. Ethan didn't call the station. Not yet. Not because he didn't trust his colleagues, but because this was personal. It was his home, his war, and he intended to finish it on his own terms. He secured the rock in an evidence bag and added it to his growing collection. That night, he sat in his garage, watching the fire footage again. Not for the evidence, but to remember. To sear every smirk, every word, every moment into his mind. Tomorrow, he would stop watching. Tomorrow, he would strike back. He leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, almost like a vow. They started this in the shadows, but I'll end it in broad daylight. Morning light spilled over Ethan Cole's living room, but there was nothing warm about it. The remnants of the previous night's warning, the rock with its crude threat, sat sealed in an evidence bag on the table, next to his badge, his coffee, and a growing sense of righteous fury. Outside, birds chirped as if nothing had happened, as if his brake line hadn't been cut, as if someone hadn't just promised to make him disappear. Ethan knew the game had changed. The HOA wasn't just a collection of power-hungry retirees anymore. No. Vivian Hart was orchestrating something darker, and her people were willing to get their hands dirty. This was no longer about fines or fences. This was a declaration of war. And Ethan? He was done playing defense. By 9 a.m., he was back on his feet and moving with purpose. He started with a call to Tommy Briggs. I'm going to need you to run background checks on a few of our neighborhood's most upstanding citizens, Ethan said, already pulling up names from the HOA board roster. Start with Vivian Hart, Oscar Bell, and Melissa Crane. Tommy whistled on the other end. Going full FBI on this, huh? They cut my brakes, Tommy. Silence. Then a low, serious reply. Copy that. I'm on it. With that underway, Ethan returned to his most valuable weapon, evidence. The footage from Mr. Wilkins's camera had strengthened his case, but it wasn't enough. Not if this went federal, and especially not if the HOA tried to spin the story in court. He needed to build a timeline, motive, pattern of behavior, witnesses. He grabbed a notepad and began mapping out the last 3 weeks. Welcome packet with hidden threats. Refusal to join the HOA. Harassment begins. Fines, citations. Arson, sabotage, threats, a pattern of retaliation. Clear, escalating, organized. But he wasn't the only one they'd targeted. That afternoon, Ethan knocked on the door of a tan house 3 doors down. It belonged to a woman named Carla Jennings, a single mom who worked nights and rarely spoke to anyone. Ethan remembered seeing her mailbox with multiple violation slips taped to it. Absurd things like too many plants on the porch and improper curtain colors. She opened the door cautiously, eyes narrowing when she saw him. "I'm not joining the HOA," she said immediately. Ethan held up a hand, smiling. "Good. I'm not here for that." She hesitated. "Then what?" "I'm building a case against them, and I think you might have a story to tell." An hour later, he had 3 more. Carla, who had been fined for excessive flower pots, while the Hart family parked illegally every weekend without consequence. James Miller, a veteran with PTSD, who had been threatened with eviction for installing a privacy fence. The Nguyens, whose teenage son was wrongly accused of vandalism and fined $800, only for the real culprit, a board member's grandson, to be quietly let off. "They think they're untouchable," Carla said bitterly, arms crossed at her kitchen table. "Vivian, she makes it sound like this is all about standards, but it's really about control." Ethan nodded. Not for much longer. By the end of the day, Ethan had a full folder. Testimonies, photos, fines, and most importantly, growing community support. People were tired. People were angry. They'd been too scared to speak up, but now they had someone to rally behind. That night, Ethan met Tommy at a small diner on the edge of town. He slid the folder across the table like a man placing his final bet. Tommy opened it, whistled low. "You weren't kidding." "Vivian's smart," Ethan said. "She doesn't do the dirty work herself, but she pulls every string." Tommy tapped a photo of Oscar Bell. "This guy's got 2 sealed misdemeanor records for trespassing and vandalism, quietly dismissed years ago." "Perfect," Ethan muttered. "He's their fire starter." Tommy leaned in. "So what's the move?" Ethan's voice dropped. "I want to confront them. Not arrest, not yet. I want them to sweat. I want them to see what it feels like to have no control." Tommy grinned. "So, psychological warfare?" Ethan smirked. "Exactly." The next morning, things began to shift. Ethan started leaving the garage door open, not wide, just enough to show a glimpse of a wall covered in photos, maps, strings, and printed HOA documents. When Vivian passed on her morning walk, she slowed, pretending not to look. But she did. And he knew it. He made sure to wash his patrol jacket out front. He started jogging in a police academy t-shirt. Casual reminders. Silent pressure. The board began to whisper. He saw them gathering on lawns, eyes darting toward his house. He could almost hear their thoughts. What does he know? What is he planning? Then came the rumors. Ethan heard from Carla that Vivian had quietly asked someone on the board to call a private emergency meeting, off the record. He smiled. Right where he wanted them. That night, Ethan reviewed the footage again. Only this time, not for details, but for resolve. He paused the video on Vivian's face as the fire began to burn. Her lips curled in that cold, satisfied grin. "You burned the wrong man's bike," he whispered to the screen. Then he turned to his whiteboard, circled tomorrow's date, and wrote 2 words in black marker. Game on. The neighborhood clubhouse had never seen this much tension in the air. Not during bake sales, not during community garage sales, and definitely not during any of the smugly self-important HOA meetings that had once ruled over the residents like a suburban monarchy. But today was different. Ethan Cole walked through its double doors with purpose. The echo of his boots against the hardwood floor silenced every murmur. Heads turned. Conversations froze mid-sentence. The air shifted, no longer stuffy with superiority, but thick with uncertainty and fear. Vivian Hart sat at the center of the long oak table, flanked by her loyalists. Her pearl necklace gleamed under the chandelier light, but her face betrayed none of the panic that rippled through the rest of the board, except for her grip on the pen, white-knuckled, trembling. "Mr. Cole," she said smoothly, as though nothing was amiss. To what do we owe the pleasure? Ethan didn't answer. He let the silence drag, watching as board members shifted in their seats. Melissa Crane wouldn't meet his eyes. Oscar Bell cleared his throat twice, his forehead already glistening with sweat. A few others looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Finally, Ethan placed a small black device on the table. One press. The room darkened slightly as a video began to play on the projector screen behind him. Security footage. Grainy black and white. Time-stamped. 2:14 a.m. The HOA members on the screen crept across Ethan's lawn like raccoons in a trash raid. Oscar poured gasoline. Melissa lit the match. Vivian stood at the edge of the driveway, arms folded, watching the flames take hold with the kind of satisfaction reserved for dictators and devils. The match struck. The motorcycle exploded in fire. Then came the audio. "Let's make sure he learns his place," Oscar's voice. "Do it," Vivian's voice, cold and sharp. Laughter, a clink of glasses. When the footage ended, silence fell like a gavel. Someone in the back let out a soft gasp. A chair creaked. A cough was swallowed. Ethan's voice cut through the tension. "Arson, on state-owned property, carried out by elected members of a neighborhood committee." Vivian leaned forward, her smile brittle. "This is being taken out of context." "Really?" Ethan crossed his arms. "Because I've got 4 angles of the same act, a witness statement from your neighbor, and a background check that says your fire starter has priors." Oscar turned pale. "Wait, what?" Ethan didn't flinch. "Trespassing, vandalism, charges sealed, but I dug them up." Vivian's jaw tightened. "You're overreacting. This is still a community matter." "No, ma'am," Ethan said calmly, his voice sharpening like a blade. "This is felony arson, conspiracy, and tampering with a law enforcement vehicle." He paused. "And don't even get me started on the brake line you cut." A collective intake of breath swept across the room. Vivian blinked. Her mask cracked for just a second. "What are you talking about? You think I didn't check?" Ethan leaned forward. "Clean cut. Precision work. Don't worry, I documented everything before I had it repaired." Melissa looked like she might vomit. Oscar stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. "This is harassment. You can't—" "Sit," Ethan said, voice dropping into the low, commanding register only cops could pull off. Oscar sat. Vivian's voice trembled now, though she tried to steady it. "You're trying to humiliate us." "No, I'm trying to give you a choice." Ethan pulled out a folder and tossed it onto the table. Inside are witness statements from multiple residents, records of unjustified fines, and documented abuses of power by this board. I also have a formal complaint already submitted to the state attorney's office. And as of 30 minutes ago, he paused, arrest warrants are being issued. The room exploded in panic. Melissa stood up, hands shaking. "You can't do this!" A man on the end, Alan, the treasurer, began muttering to himself. Oscar looked like he was trying to calculate his odds of making it to the back door. Ethan just smiled. "You burned my bike," he said softly. "You threatened my life, and you've bullied this community for years. But your reign ends today." Right on cue, the double doors swung open. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. One of them, Tommy Briggs, who gave Ethan a curt nod and held up a stack of papers. "Good afternoon," Tommy said with a grin. "We've got some paperwork here with your names on it." Vivian stood, the illusion of control unraveling. "This is a mistake. I demand legal representation." "You'll get it," Ethan replied coolly. "At the station, after you're booked." Oscar bolted for the door. One of the officers caught him before he made it 2 steps. Handcuffs clicked. A woman sobbed. Alan slumped into his chair, defeated. And Vivian Hart stood frozen, lips pressed tight, chin trembling as Tommy approached with the last warrant. "You thought you were above the law," Ethan said. "You're not." Tommy cuffed her gently, but firmly. "You have the right to remain silent." Vivian looked at Ethan one last time, fury and fear warring in her eyes. "I'll sue you." Ethan tilted his head. "For what? Doing my job?" She was let out, heels echoing like a funeral march. As the door slammed shut behind her, the room finally exhaled. Ethan stood there, alone, watching the silence settle like dust after a storm. Justice, long overdue, had finally arrived. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, every hallway buzzing. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind in dry grass. Neighbors who once kept their heads down were now wide-eyed and leaning forward, eager to witness the downfall of the people who had ruled their quiet streets with fear and fines. Ethan Cole stood in the back, arms crossed, a quiet observer. Vivian Hart entered first, still dressed like she was attending a charity gala instead of facing a criminal trial. Her pearl necklace shimmered under the fluorescent lights, but her eyes no longer carried the same smug confidence. Behind her came Oscar Bell, Melissa Crane, and the rest of the HOA board. Now more ghosts than tyrants. They looked smaller now, and they were about to be brought to their knees. The prosecution didn't hold back. They played the video footage for the entire courtroom. 4 separate angles, audio crystal clear, gasoline sloshing, matches striking, flames roaring, and laughter echoing over it all. Gasps filled the room. Even the judge, stern, gray-haired, and known for rarely reacting, shook his head in disbelief. When Vivian finally spoke, her voice was dry and defiant. "It was a misunderstanding," she said. "We were simply trying to enforce community standards." Officer Cole refused to comply. The judge leaned forward. "You're suggesting arson was a reasonable enforcement method?" "No," she snapped, quickly shifting tones. "It wasn't supposed to go that far. We were provoked. He intimidated us." Ethan didn't even blink. The courtroom didn't buy it either. And neither did the jury. It took less than 30 minutes to reach a verdict. Guilty. On all charges. Sentencing day was even more poetic. Vivian Hart and 2 of her closest board members received real jail time. Others were handed hefty fines and hundreds of hours of community service. Some cried, some pleaded, some begged for leniency. None was given. As the cuffs clicked around Vivian's wrists and she was escorted out of the courtroom, Ethan finally allowed himself a breath he'd been holding for weeks. She didn't look at him. She couldn't, because she knew. Her empire of intimidation had burned, just like his bike. Only this time, the flames consumed her instead. The fallout came fast. Within days, the HOA collapsed. Its leadership was either behind bars or too ashamed to show their faces. Members resigned, meetings were canceled, the website was taken down. The newsletter, once a weekly dose of condescending orders and ridiculous citations, vanished. No one stepped forward to save it, and no one missed it. Instead, something incredible began to happen. People smiled again. Lawn chairs reappeared on porches. Kids played in the street without parents glancing nervously for clipboard-wielding board members. Flags flew, dogs barked freely, and neighbors started waving to each other for the first time in years. Ethan didn't just bring justice, he brought relief. He brought freedom. The final nail in the coffin came during the community vote. With overwhelming support, the HOA was officially disbanded. The vote was followed by celebration, more joyful than any 4th of July. Someone set off fireworks in their backyard. Music blasted from open windows. Barbecue smoke curled into the sky like incense of rebirth. And then came the idea. The old HOA office, once a symbol of fear and control, would be transformed. Not just into a park, but into a space for people. For joy. For connection. A place with no rules, no fines, no inspections, just laughter and burgers. Ethan made sure he was there when the building was torn down. He stood on the edge of the demolition site, arms crossed, as the first wall collapsed in a cloud of dust. Years of paperwork, threat letters, and weaponized policies crumbled under the weight of justice. When it was over, all that remained was space, open, clean, and ready for something new. Weeks later, that space became the Freedom Garden. Grills, picnic tables, a big banner that read, HOA Free Zone, built by the people for the people. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The first community barbecue was unforgettable. Families that had once been at odds now sat side by side, trading stories and flipping burgers. Carla Jennings brought her famous baked beans. Mr. Wilkins told jokes. Even Officer Tommy Briggs showed up with a cooler full of drinks. Ethan manned the grill, spatula in hand, apron over his t-shirt. Laughter echoed across the park. And for the first time since he moved in, Ethan felt something rare and real. Belonging. "Nice place," a voice said behind him. Ethan turned. A man in his 40s stood there, holding a paper plate and wearing a cautious smile. "I'm Greg," the man said. "Just moved into the neighborhood last week." Ethan shook his hand. "Ethan." Greg gestured to the park. "So, what happened to the old HOA?" Ethan smirked. "Let's just say, they played with fire." Greg laughed. "Fair enough, but hey, have you guys thought about starting a new HOA? You know, one that's a little more reasonable?" Ethan paused, then turned to face him fully. His smile never reached his eyes. "Greg," he said, "I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that." Greg's face went pale. I'm kidding. Totally kidding." Ethan handed him a burger. "Good. Now eat that before I fine you for talking nonsense." The sun dipped low, casting a golden hue over the park. Children ran through sprinklers. Old friends clinked soda cans. Dogs chased frisbees across grass that no one had measured with a ruler. Ethan leaned back in his chair and looked around. This was the neighborhood he had hoped for. Not one ruled by petty power, but one united by shared laughter and earned peace. He took a deep breath, the scent of grilled meat and fresh grass mixing in the breeze. Justice had been served, and freedom never tasted so good. In the end, the true victory wasn't just about exposing corruption or tearing down a toxic HOA. It was about reclaiming something far more valuable: community, courage, and the freedom to live without fear. Ethan Cole didn't just fight for justice. He reminded everyone that standing up to power, even in the smallest corners of suburbia, can ignite real change. Because sometimes, injustice doesn't wear a mask or hide in shadows. Sometimes, it hides behind manicured lawns, polite smiles, and rules dressed as order. But order without compassion is control, and rules without reason, they become chains. This story isn't just about a burned motorcycle or a courtroom victory. It's about what happens when ordinary people stop accepting what's wrong just because it's always been that way. It's a reminder that you do have a voice. That silence keeps injustice alive. But action sets it on fire. So wherever you are, whatever HOA you're facing in your own life, whether it's a boss who bullies, a system that stifles, or even a voice inside that says you can't, ask yourself, what would happen if you finally said, enough? Because maybe, just maybe, someone else is waiting for you to lead the way. If this story struck a chord, inspired a thought, or made you smile, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. This is the Story Forge, where we don't just tell stories, we forge them into something that lasts.